Thank you for having me here. It's really a pleasure. It's my first time at the campaign summit, and it's also my first time in Vienna. I know it's a shame, it's such a beautiful city, so I have many reasons to be really happy to be here. Listen, Learn and Lead is the title of my presentation today. First, I would like to know who of you is familiar with social media monitoring, who knows exactly what it is. Who's using it for measuring campaign? Really only a few of you. So let me just explain a little bit who we are and what we're doing. The company I work for is called Brandwatch. My name is Patricia Schwan, and I'm heading up the Berlin office, as Lori told you already. And the Brandwatch is based in UK, and it started off in 2006, actually as a search engine for the British government. I'm always a little bit hesitating to talk about that or to say that, because most of the people then think, oh, that's the NSA or what. We don't crawl anything that would be illegal. We only crawl like publicly available data, social data, so everything that is Twitter, Facebook, blogs, forums, anything that is social. And we have our headquarters in Brighton. I'm based in the Berlin office, but we also have offices in San Francisco and New York. Yes, and what we do is we crawl 18 million sources. You can just enter keywords, and based on the keywords you get results around those keywords, and then you can segment them. And I hope during my presentation you will get a better understanding of what that actually means. So here's the agenda. After a short introduction, I will just go with you through how to track campaigns. So the most important thing is to define success. Then we look at metrics like output, outcome, outtake, and outcome. We're looking at a framework to measure campaigns and define objectives to at least, and that's the last point, to measure the success that is really at the end of the whole process. And I hope to give you some kind of like a step-by-step guide at the end how you could actually start to get into it. Maybe just a few words to me. I started 3 years ago as key account manager for Brandwatch, and what I was seeing then, because like I was in touch with, let's say, DAX 30 clients, we have like huge clients, who started with monitoring, and what I found really interesting is that at that time it was really, for the DACH region, we are pretty much behind compared to the US market, so it was really a time where companies started doing that, and they didn't really know how to actually implement and what to do with it. So they were looking at the data, but there was no clue what follows next. So even though, or the kind of like the subtitle for my presentation today is how to go from what to so what. Because what we saw back then was really people were looking at the what. How's my, how are people talking about me? What is the number of followers I have on my Facebook page or whatsoever? But if you think about it, as long as you don't define the so what happens with the data, what are you going to do about it? You spend a lot of money on a tool that you don't really need, because, there's no conclusion. So that is kind of like underlining my presentation today. Now, 3 years later, when I look at the companies who have really successfully implemented monitoring, then these are companies who got one thing really right, and that is to ask the right questions and to really very concretely and in detail define what they were actually looking for. And so we see a huge technology company, for instance, who improved their share or their share of owned and earned media, so the difference between what they put in and what they get back, from 40 to 90%. Or I'm thinking of a company who defines and looks for and identifies influences and develop, based on the monitoring, a program to really nurture their influences and make them ambassadors and increase the awareness through these ambassadors. So that's just to give you like a broad picture of where I'm coming from, because not from the political campaigning area, a little bit of a slightly different area. We all know we have like a universe of data. There are like, I don't know exactly the number of data that are, but we know in like 10 years there will be like 10 times more data in the digital universe. So the question here is, how can we potentially cut through the fog of data to get relevant insights. And I could just say, well, that's what we're doing, no problem at all. We just capture the data, we filter them, make sure that they are clean, so that they're meaningful. We have sentiment, we have sentiment analysis. We can put those data into categories. And then, of course, at the end, we display these data in beautiful dashboards so that you can read them. Easy, right? You might say, okay, but even if I look at the data, then I'm still at the what. That's what I'm looking at. But if you want to go a step further, you might look at, this is, for instance, the path of purchase, the customer journey. This is from Google. If you think of a customer journey, there are so many different touch points. How can I potentially say or tell where a client really came from? How did the client know about my product? What made him really make the decision to buy the product? Or if you think of your campaign, there are so many different touch points that influence people within the process of an election. How could you potentially really know whether the people that you address in social media voted for your candidate or whatever? So in order, you can do that actually. The trick is you can do that. It's not like super easy and you have to really think about it. But it is, nowadays you can actually even go along that path, the customer journey, and understand where the customer is and where the touch points are that are relevant. But you can only really do it if you ask yourself one very important question. And that sounds very simple and very naive. But what is success is the most crucial question when you start to get into monitoring of your campaign. So you might think, well, I want to get as many donations. I want my candidate to win. I want my product to be sold that many times. That's the success. But that's not really a metric that you can work with. I actually wanted to say today that if you start a survey, you most probably have defined very precisely the questions or the outcomes that you want to see. What do you want to find out about your survey? I just at lunch had a very nice conversation and found out even for surveys apparently this is not always true. We are facing this all the time, that companies are actually setting up their monitoring system without having asked the right questions at all. So what I would like to provide you with are these metrics that you can work with to find out how to define your own definition about what is success. So there are 5 points here that you need to take into consideration. It needs to be specific, it needs to be measurable, it needs to be achievable, it needs to be realistic, and it needs to be time-related. So that could be for the next product launch that I'm having, I want to increase my share of voice compared to last year's campaign and compared to my competitors, for instance. Something that is really concrete and in a measurable time frame and measurable and achievable. That's the wrong direction. And then there are some other metrics that you want to look at. Or you have to make a distinction between 3 different metrics. That is output, that's what you put out there. So this is how many posts, how quickly you react, do you use video, image, or the core message or something else. You have outtakes, how did people react? And that is something, that's the what part, where you can just see what happens. How many followers do you have? What are your most influential influencers? How many do you have? There are several metrics, a lot of metrics actually, that you can look at. And of course, in combination, or if you look at the metrics, you can find out if you refine your output. You know, so if you feel like Twitter is the most important channel for you, you want to do more on Twitter. If Facebook is the most important channel, then you go to that channel. That's something that you can find out through the outtakes. But to really tell the whole story, you need to get to the stage to look at the outcomes really. So how did people really change their behavior? And this might be measurable through monitoring, For instance, how the share of buzzwords on the topic changed, or did you manage to get more women into a conversation or whatever. That can be measured by monitoring, but there are also other metrics that you have to take into account, like the traffic on your landing page. If your intention was to increase the traffic on your landing page, for instance, then this is of course a metric that you also have to take into account to understand whether your measures or your activities are really successful. I will now talk a little bit about the framework that you actually need and that should help you to define the success of your campaign. And there are several things that you can look at. So a framework could be you want to increase awareness, or you want to increase the share of voice. You want to improve your sentiment. We will talk about sentiment because it's not an easy topic a bit later on. You want to increase the engagement of your influencers. You want to increase demand. You want to increase to improve your customer service. And of course, wherever you're looking at, you want to improve the return of investment. You want to look at it. So I give you some examples of how customers were using this framework and using the SMART criteria to actually measure their success. So this is a campaign of Argos, a big retailer in the UK, and they decided that they want to open e-commerce shops. So instead of having printed catalogs, they were inviting the people to go to their stores and scan through the monitor and just find online what they were looking for. They were monitoring. They were looking at the data that they got from the people who visited their stores, and their concrete goal was actually to say, we want to generate more awareness in social media within the first week of the launch compared to last year's launch. So this is one of an objective where you use the SMART criteria. It's very concrete. It's a fixed time frame. And it's measurable. And so they wanted to know how their target group, the behavior actually changes. And then they found out through monitoring that the acceptance was quite well for the e-shops, but there were still people who were actually wanting to have some printed catalog, and then they could just easily make sure that every store still had some printed catalog. It's just not everything. Or there was the campaign of Comic Relief, and they launched their first Red Nose Day in the US. And their objective was they wanted to identify influencers in order to increase awareness for the Red Nose Day in America. And what they actually then found out by tracking the influencers, that they had a famous pop band, One Direction, supporting them. And so they could get in touch with them, address them, and therefore increase the awareness for the Red Nose Day in America. Increase the share of voice is, of course, like one of the standard metrics or objectives that our clients do have. This is a way how you could actually look at increasing the share of voice. So let's say you have different candidates and you just want to know who people talk about the most, or your company, and you have competitors. And you want to know how well your competitors are doing in terms of how much people are actually talking about you. And this is something like the pie chart, something that you would look at over time. So just knowing that you have a share of 30% does not tell you a story, but if you look at it over time, then you realize whether the share increases or decreases, and then, of course, you want to take action on that. Some things that you have to bear in mind is that the share in itself is a very, very, very top-level metric. So, of course, you also want to look at the data itself and find out whether the sentiment is positive or negative. Because if the share is mostly negative, then it's probably not exactly what you want. I'm pretty aware that everybody who had the chance to already take a look into monitoring is probably pretty aware that that sentiment classification, it's not an easy thing to do. And I think it's not too bold to say that there's no tool that really got it completely right. And somehow maybe we can even be glad about it, because we have to do with language. And this is a very unique thing. And you have things like irony and stuff that just can't be easily mimicked by machines. So you can't fully rely on what a machine tells you about positive or negative data about your brand or candidate or whatever. But there are other things that like measures or actions that you can take to get a better idea about what negative and positive actually means. So, for instance, if you look at this is like a sales funnel that we use in commercial, where we talk of awareness. That is just like the sheer amount of data that is in there in this universe about you. And then you have the automated sentiment classification, where you can say, okay, we have that much positive mentions. But what you can also find out, for instance, is if people want to buy your product, if people are willing to vote for your candidate, by just simply based on keywords, search for specific topics. I want to buy the product XYZ. And then you can also find out whether people really purchased that product, or you can find out whether people were really voted for that candidate, because that's how people are talking about it, and you can find that out. Or even people who say, I did that again, I bought the product again, and at the end you then can find out how people are talking about how they love your product. We know that we see that a lot in the cosmetic industry, where people are really like loving products. It's really astounding to see. You'll be surprised how many people are really love a lipstick, for instance. But that helps the companies to really understand, okay, these are our ambassadors. And you can, of course, again, over time, easily say, I want to increase the number of ambassadors by finding out how many people are talking about how they love our products. And you can even do that. This is an example from the e-commerce world. Like, these are e-commerce shops. So there's the Zalando, German-based e-commerce, and there's others. And what we did is we just basically, this what you see here is a screenshot of our data visualization, a real-time monitoring tool. So data get into the system in real time. So it's used for command centers where we can immediately find out what's happening in social. And we made a distinction between, awareness, purchase intent, what else we have, send back products, customer service, and also detractors. It's also very interesting. So you can also find out who really hates you, not only who really loves you. And as I said at the beginning, these are touch points. In this case, it's a commercial example, but you can also do that for campaigning for a political campaign, to just gather the data that relate to certain touch points and find out about the relation. Or you can, you may have the objective to identify a demand to increase your revenue. What we did here is we were asking, or we were searching for people talking about coffee and how they want coffee. Like people who said, I want a coffee now. And interestingly, we find out and this is over a period of, let's say, half a year or so, and we found out that interestingly on Mondays apparently people really want coffee. I mean, understandable. And we were also looking for whether they want to have like milk or sugar or want it black. Mondays are the day for black coffee. So if that resonates somehow. So if I was a coffee company, I would probably make sure that I have a special advertisement for black coffee on Mondays. Reduce costs, obviously, this is an objective that every company should have. I want to reduce costs. There's an example like KLM is really, really straightforward with it. So I really love this, what they did on their website, where you could find out actually how many minutes you have to expect to wait to get an answer to your question. So increase, like by monitoring how many mentions get in through your customer service sites, how long does it take to answer questions, how does the sentiment change regarding your product through your customer service. So if you know provide a very quick and good customer service. And you can then later find out by monitoring that the reputation of your product and your company has improved, and you have more positive mentions. Then you have a clear indication about how well actually your customer service works. And return of invest, and this is really, of course, the thing that we get asked about the most, because it doesn't. I remember once we had a discussion with people who were of the opinion that you could just, when you have a campaign, you could just put some kind of like dollar signs behind every post, like, you know, I have 10 positive posts, that's worth $10. My honest opinion, or my humble opinion, is that it doesn't work. It'll be, you know, it'd be wonderful if that worked, because it would be such an easy way to measure success and know how to get the return of investment. I don't think it works. First of all, we don't know. No tool in the world captures everything. And then again, as I talked about the different touch points, if you were totally sure that the last, like the click on your website, the traffic, the landing page was actually the activity that led to success, then maybe that would work. But with all the touch points there are, how would you possibly be able to measure success that way? So it's not that easy. But what you also have to take into consideration is, once you have defined your clear targets, your smart targets, and once you measure them, you can not only decide what kind of actions you want to take and need to take to improve the results, but you also want to look at the whole picture of what is success. So, did your reputation improve? Then this is a success, and it's a return of invest. Of course, you have to kind of like define how much this is worth to you, and you should do that at the very beginning. But it's not always like we sell more products and we save costs. An improved net promoter score, when people are really like recommending you, is return of invest. Of course, you have to have defined your targets, and you have to measure where the net promoter score is and where you want it to have. But once that you manage through social to get your net promoter score up, this is return of invest. A greater loyalty, if you think of the funnel that I was showing, where you have your ambassadors, your love brands, influencers. If you manage to grow your community of ambassadors and get a greater loyalty, then this is return of invest. And of course, if the intent to purchase rate increases, this is also return of invest. And you might find out that the intent to purchase increases, but you're not selling more products. Then you probably have a problem. But you have an indication that you have where to look at the problem, because it's not that the people don't want your product. So knowing that you increase your intent to purchase is the return of invest. And to take all this into consideration is just very, very crucial when you want to implement monitoring in a successful way. So let's get started. Given you were interested, say, okay, how can I actually do that? I'm interested in a monitoring tool. I buy a monitoring tool. I have a campaign running. What am I going to do? Define the success. Use smart criteria to define exactly what you want to achieve. Understand output, outtake, and outcome, and constantly monitor the three and find out what works best. Create a framework to measure your campaign. Define the specific objectives and go from what to so what. Take action. If the intent to purchase increases and your sales doesn't, well, talk to your sales reps, or find out what the problem actually is. And measure your campaign in a 360-degree environment. Don't only look at social data. Look at your web traffic. Look at the donations that you got. Look at all the data that you have and compare them with each other to make sense and get meaningful insights out of your monitoring. Thank you very much.